Those of you who've actually slept with a friend's mom or dad, how did it go down? Story 1. It was my friend's aunt, not his mom, but they were like close family and always over his house. I knew her for about 10 years, but barely spoke at length with her. She had a pretty American life, husband, 3 boys, they liked camping and archery and Boy Scouts. They were always involved with family and friends and always together. Her husband had been cheating on her with their kids' friends' parents. Kind of a swinging situation, but she was out of the loop. Once she found out, she kept it secret because she didn't want to ruin the family and just dealt with denying their relationship, while sleeping in the same bed. She knew for about 4 years and finally, at 40 years old, and 20 years of marriage, decided to divorce him. Very messy divorce. Her ex straight told her kids that she just didn't want a family anymore and she didn't want to tell them he had cheated because she didn't want them to think of their father like that. She held true for quite a few years, but the kids were brainwashed by her ex. She was alienated from her kids. I was over my friends, her nephews, house on and off for a lot of my late teens and early 20s. He lived right down the road and us younger guys would smoke weed and hang out there all the time. The entire summer was spent at his house. I was about 23, she 42, when we just kinda started chatting at the table. She didn't smoke. She would just be visiting the family because it was all she had at that point. Every couple weeks after that we would find ourselves chatting away somewhere in or around the house or the pool. Often when people were around we kept conversations short and a lot of eye glancing and passing rubs would take the place of talk. She was definitely in great shape. Cute and blonde. Strong, determined, but you could tell she dealt with a lot. She was tense to the touch. She worked hard and just didn't get a good shake. We started texting because we needed each other's numbers for some Halloween party she was hosting for the extended family. Eventually intermittent texting turned flirtatious. Similar to the top post on this thread, we started to hug goodbye from seeing each other, and she would just hug a little bit longer than friendly. One night, I was house-sitting for someone and told her I was doing nothing and she could come by and hang out, meet the dogs and the weird lizard they had. She accepted and I definitely experienced a type of anxiety that you could taste. She came over. We ordered Italian food. She didn't even want to be seen by the delivery driver, and that was when I knew she had some bad intentions too. We ended up in front of the TV, she just snuggled right up to my chest and my hand fell on her butt. I don't think 30 seconds went by and we looked and started kissing. I immediately started to undo her pants. As she's taking her pants off she says she hasn't done this in 5 years and she was really nervous. It was the hottest intimacy I'd ever had. I remember it vividly. Also similar to the top post, she was adamant I finish inside her and she would talk about how she wanted to feel the warmth when I finish. I've never had a better intimacy partner. We ended up hooking up about 5 more times over the course of a year. I would go to her house a few towns over and she would make us a full dinner, we'd chat over wine, and have such amazing and fulfilling intimacy. We both ended up dating people, but would stay in touch. We hooked up once again when we were single again. I still see her a couple times a year when I visit for family BBQs and pool parties at my friend's house. Everything is super cool. We still glance and rub and nudge. We still hug for way too long. No one has a clue. Except Reddit.
Story 2. Her daughter dumped me for a guy she didn't like, and I fell on hard times with my mom, so I would occasionally go over there to shower and eat something. She was in her 40s, very thin, but had a very nice face and was always very nice to me. I was 18 and always very complimentary to her and thankful for her helping me out. She was helping me without her daughter's knowledge as well. One day a hug goodbye got really long. She wouldn't let go, but she wasn't doing anything else. Just hanging on very tight. Being 18 and because of our relationship, I got excited. I guess she felt it and nuzzled closer. I started kissing her neck. Pulled her dress up. I guess her husband didn't really pay attention to her. Something I didn't notice or pay attention to while I was dating her daughter. We went at it for a few hours as the house was empty. She must have been pent up. It was honestly surreal. It didn't set in for a few days. My ex and my friends were all intertwined. I couldn't tell anyone and never have. Happened a few more times until I had my life in order and it seemed like she was starting to regret cheating on her husband. She would only let me finish inside of her, which blew my mind as I had been constantly pulling out of her daughter for fear of the obvious. It definitely made being dumped by my first girlfriend a lot easier to deal with.
Story 3. Needed a place to stay when I was 18, so my friend's mom said I could move in with them and rent a room. Everyone in the house had a tendency to go to bed early except her and I. She liked to drink, I liked to game. One night I was bored and went out to the garage where she was drinking and listening to music. We bullshit for a while and she asked if I wanted a drink. Hell yeah, I do. After I had a couple shots of Goldschlager, she started with the "Oh, my neck is so stiff. I wish someone would rub it." Being a warm-blooded teen with hormones and booze coursing through my veins, I jumped at the chance. She was 47 and had the body of someone in her early 20s. As I rubbed her shoulders, the strap on her nightgown kept falling down, showing a little more skin. She'd pick it up and let it fall further the next time. Each time I'd let my hands wander a little. After a few minutes she commented how wonderful it felt and if I'd do her back. I don't think any blood was making it past my waist, so I agreed without hesitation. We went inside, she faced away from me and pulled her gown down to her waist and laid on her stomach. I rubbed her back for a while and when I was done I half-jokingly asked if she needed the front done. She said yes, but only if I'd rub her breasts. I couldn't get a single word out. I was stunned. She rolled over, breasts right there for me to play with, so I waited for my brain to reboot and did as I was told. After that massage, things escalated and she ended up on top of me on the couch. That was the first time I had intimacy without a condom and I immediately saw what all the fuss was about. It happened a few more times, always started with her asking if I wanted a drink. Eventually I put an end to it because I got back with my GF and I wasn't going to cheat on her. Once I stopped doing it with the mom, she flipped out on me and evicted me. I wasn't able to ever tell my friend what happened while I lived there because him and his mom would get nasty when they fought. In those times nothing was sacred, whatever they could say to hurt the other. After I moved out he called me a motherfucker one night and I laughed until I was afraid I'd pass out. When I regained my composure he asked what was so funny. I told him he wasn't a liar and told him what had happened. For 30 minutes all he could say is, "You're freaking kidding me."
Story 4. I feel very fortunate to have had a positive experience. I knew I wanted her the moment I saw her, but this happens a lot. I'm sure you've seen someone on the street and thought of the things you'd like to do with them if you had the opportunity. I didn't say or do anything about it for months, until I playfully invited her to see a movie with me. It's a harmless thing to ask, right? We exchanged numbers and while texting she sent the first naughty message. We stayed up all night texting. I felt like I was dreaming. We met the following night and made out in her car. I couldn't believe how quickly things were escalating, but she admitted how she felt about me for the past few months as well, right down to being attracted to my voice. She went down on me in her car the same night. 2 days later, she booked a hotel and we did it for the first time. It was incredible. I had never finished so hard before. I hit the painting on the wall above the bed. Sorry anyone who stays in that room. This went on almost one a week for over a year. It was the best time of my life. I grew so much as a person. All my regrets and mistakes I ever made were washed away. Everything I ever did or happened to me didn't matter anymore, because it somehow led me to her, in this life, in this timeline. I wish I met her sooner, before she wound up in a failed marriage, but I know that's impossible. I loved her and still do. We stopped because she needed to focus on her role in her son's life as his mother. She wasn't young like me, can't just live like that at that stage anymore. I hope she's still getting her intimate release somehow. I can't imagine how much torture it is to be trapped in a loveless marriage. To bring a little humor into this, we eventually saw a movie months into whatever it was we had. We saw Suicide Squad. I liked it, but she also gave me a Slurpee in the theater parking lot before we went in, so I might be biased.
Story 5. First started with some friends from work in a group chat. Let's call the friend in question Dave.
For months we were told stories by Dave about his relationship with his mother, and all the stupid shit she would do when he was growing up. Don't remember exactly, but it wasn't anything weird between them, it was just too much information. I really never cared for Dave, as he was a one-upper in every conversation. You did that? Oh yeah, I've done that backwards. You've caught a fish? Oh, I've caught one 2 times bigger. During some of these conversations, the jokes started about doing it with Dave's mom. I was kind of the ringleader on the joke train. Fast forward to maybe 6 months, and the group chat was still going. I was moved to a different building for a different job. While I was there, word came through that Dave's mom was actually getting hired at the company. I giggled to myself, and continued on. Little did I know that his mom would be on my team and her cubicle was right next to mine. Once I saw her, I was immediately attracted to her. She was a little older, 48, and had a nice body, and had this aura to her that she knows she can get what she wants. I've always been a flirt, and I'm pretty personable to most around me. So we start talking as I have a natural in as Dave's friend. We at times kind of shit-talked on him between the two of us, but it wasn't anything terrible. After a few weeks of flirting, I asked her if she wanted to go out for beers. She said sure, why don't you come over to my house and we will have dinner. Dinner and drinks were had. After dinner we were conversing and come to find out we had a lot of things in common, and one of them being very affectionate. She came over and sat next to me and the touching started to happen. One thing led to another and we ended upstairs in her room. Did I see Dave's picture on the wall as we were going up? Yes, and did it stop anything? No. This was probably some of the best intimacy of my life. She was completely giving, and due to her doing Bikram hot yoga for many years, very flexible. She took complete control, as I was her amusement park. She even knew how to twerk while being on top, which was incredible. I tested her flexibility and surprisingly both legs got behind her head. After all is said and done, I head downstairs for some water. I was thirsty after being taken to my limits. As I passed by my friend's picture on the wall, I of course gave the picture a little fist bump. We were hanging out for a few weeks, and I had to call it off as I didn't want to end up having to tell my friend I was dating his mom.
Story 6. I was 18 and my GF and I went to the zoo with her mom, and my GF ended up throwing some kind of temper tantrum. Since her mother drove, it was an awkward car ride home. I wouldn't even talk to her, and I looked over and she was giving me a death stare and said, "Do you want to break up?" I sat there for a second and her mom said she was going to drop her, my GF, and drive me the rest of the way home. I said yeah, I do. She dropped her daughter off and drove me home. I joked that my plan to get to her via her daughter had worked. She laughed at that and said I'd be lost and have no idea what to do with her. I blushed so hard at that and she saw it. It took me a few minutes to gather my thoughts and figured, screw it, I'm going to flirt. Her mom, since the day I met her, would always wear tighter shirts and hip-hugging jeans around me. She was a recently divorced woman who may have been lonely, who knows. So I made a flirty comment about her looking fitter every time I came over. We get back to my house, my parents aren't there, and she had joked about taking the day off to come and use my pool. So I used that and said, "It's a great night for night swimming." I fully expected her to just laugh and tell me to get out. But she said okay, and there I was with my now ex-GF's mother in my pool. She's in her undies and we are making out. The following weekend my now ex went to her dad's for the weekend and I stayed the weekend with her mother and we messed around. It went on for a few weeks more but broke it off when her daughter started suspecting it. I don't regret it and we both had a lot of fun.
Story 7. I was 19, and my girlfriend and I had broken up a few months earlier after she got pregnant, and we went to the local clinic to take care of it. There was a lot of understandable tension about experience. She'd since gone off to college. I'd been working for her mother on weekends for 2 years, doing heavy labor on her small farm, more of a giant vegetable garden, actually. After work, I'd normally take a shower in a small campsite shower stall behind the barn. That was the routine. I rarely saw the mom more than a few minutes, but she was sweet and seemed to like me a bit, as I was a pretty responsible and hardworking kid. She had no idea why her daughter and I had broken up, so there was no bad blood or anything. Anyhow, it was a cold day, and she happened to come out just as I was about to take a shower, and suggested that I come inside and use the one there so as not to freeze. I said fine, went into the guest bathroom and had a pleasant warm shower. The same thing happened the next few times. She just told me to go ahead and take a shower so long as it was cold out. I was always really good about not leaving the place a mess, as it was a hell of a lot nicer than showering outside. Then one day, I was showering and she knocked on the door to ask if I needed anything, but I couldn't hear her well, so I yelled at her that I was in the shower and, well, couldn't hear her well. She came into the bathroom and asked if I needed a towel. This was weird as I always had a towel, but I wasn't too freaked out about this. The shower had a tiled wall in front of it, which you had to step around to enter, so she couldn't really see me. I told her I was fine, and to my surprise she walked over to the open space leading to the shower and just stared. Shampoo suds were running down my face, and I was a little embarrassed, but I acted normal and halfway jokingly asked if she wanted to come in. I tend to deal with stress by making jokes. She didn't say a word and disappeared. I was horrified that I'd offended her somehow, but then she stepped into the shower, naked, and came to my side as if yes indeed, she needed a shower. Now way freaked out, I started washing her back, which seemed like the most benign thing I could do. I should mention that this was 34 years ago, and while all of this seems obvious now, at the time I wasn't so sure. Until she knelt down and began sucking. I was enormously turned on, still a little freaked out, and she was, quite good. I would have blown my load pretty quickly if my heart hadn't been beating about 1,000,000 miles an hour out of nervousness. As it was, it took a while. She had been divorced almost since XGF was born and as far as I could tell had never dated or expressed much interest in doing so. XGF told me she thought her mom was frigid, which now was impossible to believe. Mom was also an ardent swallower, unlike XGF. As soon as I was done, she left the shower, and when I came downstairs, she made me coffee and neither of us discussed it. The following week was horrible, as I had no idea how I would react, and I vacillated between hoping I would see her the next weekend and praying I wouldn't. But I did, and this time she walked into the bathroom with me and stripped alongside me. If anything, I was more nervous, a common theme in this story, sorry if it's repetitious, and we showered together again. At one point, she turned around and faced the wall, spread her legs a bit and asked me to touch her. I did and things accelerated to the point where it seemed like I should do it with her from behind, but when I tried this, she said no, and like the first time, kneel to suck. I finished quickly this time. The next time, she didn't shower with me, but when I did come out of the shower, she led me to her bedroom, we got under the covers and made out like teenagers for a while. It was confusing and weird. Over roughly 20 months, she displayed a lot of masochistic tendencies, but would never let me control her or eat her or let me do it with her, despite being really submissive. She would not touch herself at all and said that she found the idea repulsive. She liked doing from behind somewhat roughly, introduced me to the concept, as it turned out, liked having it stuffed down her throat. I wasn't much into rough intimacy, but that was all fine stuff. She would let me spend the night in her bed, but she would sleep in another room, would always be up before me, would not have normal intimacy in the morning, though mouth and back stuff were on the breakfast menu. The weird thing is that there seemed to be a tacit rule that we weren't to make much small talk, although she was kind and seemed to like me beyond the intimacy. Over holidays, I was not to show up, XGF was visiting, but one time she called to say she'd booked a room at a motel, where she would only give me a long and gentle slurp and a long massage, no intimacy. On some level, I think she was very lonely, which made her general silence when we were together bewildering. Why did it end? There were about 4 occasions in a row where she made it clear she wanted me to destroy her mouth very violently, which creeped me out, that's not my thing, and the last time I just refused and she started to cry. The final straw was when she asked me if I would really hurt her. I didn't know what she meant and still don't really know, but I felt that things were getting out of hand, so I pretty politely told her so and quit the job. I saw her once more at a shop, 2 years later, and she greeted me exactly as if I were her daughter's high school boyfriend and nothing else and was quite pleasant. She must be in her late 70s now, if she's still around, which is also quite strange.
Story 8. I was the friend. Parents had me young, mom left but dad kept me and raised me as a single parent. In my teenage years I met a friend who I'll call Felicia. She had a huge crush on my dad and tended to stutter in his presence. Don't know if dad knew or if he just assumed she was like that in general. I was her only friend and he knew that. She got bullied a lot in school. He knew about that too. She also had a rough home life, so she was over at my place a lot. Said she only really felt safe at my house. Before you start railing on my dad, nothing happened back then. She was a kid and looked like one, had horrible acne and her personal hygiene wasn't the best. I had to remind her to take showers. But life happened. We graduated, moved on. We both got boyfriends. Made new friends but we kept in touch. I went to uni, she did, but dropped out because she got pregnant with her then boyfriend. They ended up breaking up. He was a scumbag who wasn't any better than her dad. Stalked her, too. Still remember her calling me in tears because he'd come to her apartment to threaten her, and she was losing her mind and refused to call the cops. Eventually she had the baby. To make things even worse, the kid got cancer and died as a toddler. She was destitute. I was engaged by now and we couldn't take her in, but she was in pieces, and the way she was talking, I was terrified she was going to off herself. None of our friends could take her in either, and her ex was starting up again with his crap. He'd lost interest in her after the baby was born, but after she died, decided it was all my friend's fault. I ended up calling my dad begging him to let Felicia have my old room. He'd talked about selling up but the house was fully paid off and he never got around to it. He sort of shrugged and went, "Why not? She was a good kid." He hadn't seen her for years at that point, and I think he was lonely after I moved out. So he let her stay rent-free until she got back on her feet. Even paid for her to get counseling. In exchange she cleaned the house and helped him redo the garden. Anyway, she never moved out. My dad has always been really generous, and I guess he saw a kindred spirit in Felicia since she was also pregnant young, and he's never wanted people to go through what he did. So I wasn't surprised that her stay was lasting a long time. They genuinely seemed to become friends, and my dad seemed happy again now the house wasn't empty. 3 years after she moved in, my friend guiltily fessed up. She'd been sleeping with my father for 2 years. They ended up getting married. Our kids are both 10. It is super weird that I have a baby half-brother through them, but they're all happy, and to this day if they divorced I still don't know whose but I'd kick. Visits home are still a bit weird though. It's not awkward, not exactly, just weird.
Story 9. For me it ended up being a really great experience. In my friend group of 7 guys including me, we had one friend named Mike whose place we would typically hang out at. His parents were never really ever together, and so it was a single mom home and they had a pretty big house with a pool, a really nice place. We would get together a lot and spend the night at his place on the weekends during the summer. His mom wasn't exactly a 10/10, but she was a cute, skinny, happy woman who had a good sense of humor and was fun to be around. She was always happy to let Mike have us over, even though sometimes Mike wouldn't want people over. Now, Mike's room was in the basement where we would all hang out and his mom was upstairs. I had always been somewhat attracted to her since I began hanging out over there when I was a freshman in high school, and though she was friendly to all of us in the friend group, she would always be really nice to me. Now, all the other guys were a little bit older, so they graduated before I did, and everyone went away for college except me, being a junior in high school. So I didn't get to hang out at Mike's except for the occasional weekend he was in town and during the summer when he wasn't working. At some point I exchanged numbers with his mom, and during the summer if he was at work I would text his mom and ask if I could come over, and she would always tell me I could come whenever I wanted and I was always welcome. So I started coming over almost every weekend when Mike wasn't working just to hang out, and Mike started to get kind of irritated because he liked his alone time as well. So I made up a lie that I was going through a hard time, and he believed me. I began to start feeling really attracted to his mom at this point because I was spending so much time around her.
At this point I almost felt desperate because of how badly I wanted her. I would text her and ask different things about how her day was going and such. I would work out and then come over when Mike wasn't home and swim in the pool. I would go out of my way to use the upstairs shower by her room and walk out in a towel because she thought it was funny. The more I think about it now, a lot of this was kind of silly because besides her being overly friendly, there was never really any concrete proof that she wanted to have intimacy with me. Summer was almost over and then life actually did get rough. My parents decided to get divorced. I told all my friends including Mike about it, but asked they keep it on the down low because I was so upset about it. Mike ended up telling his mom about it, and the last night I spent over there before Mike had to go back to school, his mom told me I was always welcome to stay there if I needed to, anytime even if Mike wasn't there. I did not take her up on that offer, but a few months later Mike was back in town for Thanksgiving break. When he was back, I spent the night there as usual, and after Mike went to bed, I was going to sleep on the floor but was uncomfortable, so I went upstairs to sleep on the couch in the living room. I slept in my boxers, and at some point I woke to see her walk into the kitchen wearing only a long t-shirt. Me being the horny, depressed teenager I was, got up and walked into the kitchen as well as if to look for a midnight snack. We sort of acknowledged each other and I opened up the fridge, with no intentions of eating anything, and she was getting something across the kitchen out of a low cupboard, when she bent over and I saw everything, and then got back up, walked over to me at the fridge, pulled my boxes down and started giving me a slurp eye. Everything after that is sort of vivid. We ended up going back to her room and having intimacy for what felt like hours. After finishing she and I talked for a while about how I was feeling and she really helped me out and I could tell she genuinely cared. I ended up going back downstairs and sleeping on the floor. After that weekend, I ended up feeling a lot less depressed. I had had intimacy before, but that was special. We texted on occasion, and after Mike went back to college I would go over there and spend the night whenever I could, and she would always listen when I would vent about my parents' divorce or anything else going on in my life, plus the intimacy. We never really had any sort of relationship even though we never dated anyone else, and Mike and I remained good friends, even though he never found out. Eventually I ended up moving away for college and it stopped there. Mike has since graduated and has his own house in town. Just a couple weeks ago I picked him up from his mom's house while his car was in the shop and I saw her for the first time in a long time. We hugged and chatted for a few, but I think at this point it's just an unspoken agreement not to bring it up.
Story 10. My best friend. Still to this day's mother. It all started out with me living with the best friend at the time, inviting someone I less than preferred to come over and spend a week's time with us. She had jokingly told me her mother would let me stay at her house, and I insisted on that instead of dealing with my best friend and her new boyfriend in the same house for a week. Fast forward to the day he gets here, I meet him and move along. At this point, I should mention, my best friend, her mother, and myself all work at the same place, and at this place her mother is my boss. So her mother took it as an opportunity to have a taxi driver to and from work every day. And it wasn't bad. We were on good conditions from the start, seeing her every day and eating lunch many a times. So staying at her place was no real sweat. Now, my best friend is quite attractive, and I've always been into MILFs and cougars, but never experienced one. But my goodness was she attractive. One day after work, while I was still staying there, we had plans. I was going to finish my raid on a game around 7, and she'd have dinner cooked, and we'd have wine and watch a movie. Instead, I finished my raid, and realized, no dinner, not even any lights on. I go to find her, and she's crying in front of a computer screen. Not revealing anything personal, but she had gotten some bad news of TLDR, her boyfriend is an ass, and she was reading his emails, which we all know is a bad idea in the first place. I urge her up after hugging her for a little bit, and encourage that we go make dinner together, and I'll make her my favorite drink, and we can sit down and watch this movie. At this point, I wanted her not thinking about it, and just having a good time. About 45 minutes into the movie, she's laying down, with her feet across me, and I'm sitting up. I ask her if it'd be weird if I laid down as well, and without saying anything she just scoots forward for me to lay between her and the couch. And well, after a few drinks she pets on my ear, and head trailing down my collarbone and instinct took over. I reciprocated her pets along her hips, and down her pants. Once my hand got down it was all instinct. And before I knew it, she was on top of me on the couch. And it was the best surprise session of my life. Tired we turned off the movie, and went to share her bed, as well as round 2. Then waking up for work 7 hours later. We continued to date behind her daughter's back for the better part of an entire year, and she was without a shadow of a doubt the best and most exciting partner I've ever had, insisting I finish inside of her, and I'd never been able to with prior girlfriends my age. She was into a numerous amount of kinks that I had shared, and she was explorative with toys and positions. Unfortunately, it did come to a somewhat sour end on my side. I really did grow to love her, and because of the age it was something that could never be, and deep down, I felt she loved me as deeply as I love her, but knew for the same reason, and decided to be the bad guy and break my heart to save us in the end. We still talk and remain friends for the surface level of saving face and making family events more bearable. Bonus points. I recently told my best friend, and she's 100% about it. She high-fived me when I told her.